Thank you, Ilya, for this beautiful introduction. Well, to be honest, I was so much impressed by Gretchen's talk that I immediately felt an urge to continue in the same line, because it's also somehow relates to my studies in Georges Bataille and the politics, the economy of gift, and his work with the anthropological material as well, based on French anthropology on Marcel Mauss. But today I will be talking about something slightly different, about atom. And I would like to, at the beginning, I will show you two images that somehow give an impression on the two sides of my topic. On the one hand, I have this image from 1974, which is called Blacksmiths of Modernity, the mosaic on the facade of the entrance of the Institute for Nuclear Research in Kiev, Ukraine. And this image gives us an idea, an impression of this Promethean hyper-optimism of the Soviet era, not only of the Soviet, but in general of this techno-optimist projections of the 20th century. And on the other hand, the image, this famous work by Andy Warhol from 1963, which is called The Red Explosion. And you see the image, one photo of the atomic cloud over Hiroshima. And then here we have an endless mass replication of the image of the apocalypse, indiscernible from a can of soup. And this idea of a repetition, an endless repetition of the same, that Freud would call a death drive, but also something that for us feels like an environment in which we are living right now, in this endless repetition of the same, and we are still there in this idea of the replication of the same fear, the same phobia. So now I come to my topic. If we consider the future of humanity, as I already mentioned in my introduction to the introduction, the question of energy, that is, what do we burn in order to keep going, is crucial. And today there exist three types of energy sources: fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, renewables, wind, sun, water, nuclear energy, atoms. In spite of hegemonic discourses of sustainability and smooth transition from the black fossil fuel to the green renewables, nuclear energy still offers much bigger productive capacities for late capitalism with its rapidly growing scales of technological developments. Nuclear power plants release energy from fission, that is, the splitting of one atom into two. But there is yet another type of energy, fusion or nuclear synthesis. In fusion reaction, the energy is released when the two atoms slam into one. The amount of energy produced by fusion is several times bigger than by fission. And this energy, potentially, the fusion energy, potentially infinite and clean, creates a utopian horizon for the future of humanity, which I will more or less discuss right now. So technically speaking, the biggest and the most powerful fusion reactor in our planetary system is the sun. Nuclear fusion that constantly undergo in the sun makes it the ultimate source of energy and all life on Earth. In order to colonize cosmic space, we have to need something similar at our full disposal. For this, humanity has to create the conditions similar to the sun on Earth. There must be extreme temperatures and pressure that will force atoms of helium to fuse. But we also must have a technical possibility to control the reaction and sustain the burning of the superhot plasma that is necessary for it. And you might know this image from a wonderful film from 1962 directed by Mikhail Rohm, which is called 9 Days in 1 Year. It's a Soviet project in Siberia. A scholar is trying to get this superhot plasma. They fail, the experimentation fails, and there is a lot of discussion. I show you this picture just in order to make you see this wonderful movie, and if you haven't done so, because it has a lot of untimely discussions on the dialectics of war and peace, and the role also the role of atomic energy and atomic nuclear weapons in this balance, fragile balance of war and peace, and also on the gender. Somehow the gender implications of the nuclear policies, such as certain allusion and certain non-obvious identification between the female energy and the superhot plasma that the scholar is trying to reach, but instead he is. Yeah, whatever. I will not spoil. But this is an image that also gives you an impression of this inspiration of the scholars, of the artists, of film directors from the 60s that is invested in the energy, the atomic energy projects. Basically, the idea is that as soon as our fusion reactors that looks like tokamaks will reach the point of generating more energy than they consume, it will become possible to create new superpower technologies designed for colonizing the whole solar system, including the sun itself. And this will supposedly satisfy the energetic needs of humanity for many epochs to come. In 1960, one of such projects was popularized by theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson, who suggested that the growing needs of energy needs of advanced technological civilizations would inevitably lead to the formation of artificial megastructures around the sun that would capture a large amount of its power output. There can be various modifications of the so-called Dyson sphere, but the main principle is that there must be a technology that would allow to colonize the sun and consume its energy at a maximum scale without being burned down by its radiation. The production of such a megastructure will require colossal resources. In order to get enough materials for building this Dyson sphere, future generations will have to disassemble all other planets on the solar system. All that we call nature and cosmos solar system will be destroyed for this ultimate megastructure that would allow humans to freely navigate and colonize cosmic space. Such techno-optimist utopias, Dyson sphere and the like, especially popular in the mid-20th century, both in the Soviet bloc and in Western capitalist societies, look into infinity. Dyson sphere is just an example of a fantastic belief that humanity can live as long as the sun itself, or even longer, and endlessly expand into the universe. Philosophically speaking, such progression can be qualified as a bad infinity. This is a Hegelian term from Hegel, which means something like an endless line or an infinite and endless row of numbers, or a movement that never reaches its final destination and does not really achieve anything. So endless progression. What is at stake here is a colonial model of extractive economy that projects itself into infinity. There are new and new horizons ahead, and at the same time new and new debris behind, because it destroys everything on the way. There exist indeed alternative futurist fantasies, of which the most radical, on my view, belongs to the Soviet philosopher Everett Ilyenkov. Here is the guy. In 1960 or in 1956, he wrote an essay called Cosmology of the Spirit, a philosophical poetic phantasmagoria based on the principles of dialectical materialism. This essay could not be published during Ilyenkov's lifetime, and there are reasons for that. With the strongest evidence, the essay argues that the final cause of humanity and its highest ultimate mission is to destroy itself and the universe entirely. Translating the Hegelian idea of substance as subject into the language of dialectical materialism, Ilyenkov claims that all matter is intelligent, and the highest point of the development of the thinking matter is human intelligence. Not the one that we have reached now, but the one that will actualize itself in the future with the acceleration of progressive communist technologies when humanity will ultimately conquer the universe and become as perfect as God. That was the premise of a communist thinker. As a Marxist, Ilyenkov does not believe in God, but believes in the advancement of human spirit. The natural limit of its development is the process of entropy, the dissipation of energy in space and cooling down of the universe. Here comes Ilyenkov's question: is there a possibility to reverse this process of entropy? So the task there is not to outlive the sun, but rather to make it resurrect by means of science and technology, or a sort of magic, as you wish, like a communist avant-garde magic. According to Ilyenkov, the reversal of the process of entropy cannot go naturally. Something should break the natural course of things. A conscious act. Entropy brings the world to death in cold and darkness. The opposite to this process is fire. And that's why we are here, to light the fire. Here, quote: at some peak point of their development, thinking beings executing their cosmological duty and sacrificing themselves produce a conscious cosmic catastrophe, provoking a process, a reverse thermal dying of cosmic matter. In simple terms, this act materializes in the guise of a colossal cosmic explosion having a chain-like character, and the matter of which, the explosive mass, emerges as the totality of elementary structures, is dispersed by emission through the whole universal space. End of quote. This is what thinking beings, according to Ilyenkov, have to do, to prevent the natural death of the universe by pressing some ultimate red button to destroy the world intentionally in order to make it appear again from the very act of its destruction by fire. And this circular movement of matter, the end of which coincides with its beginning, presents, according to Ilyenkov, a true Hegelian infinity mediated by intelligence, or intelligent matter, thinking matter. Ilyenkov's cosmology presents a very peculiar version of the Big Bang theory, as you might notice, the temporality of which is inverted and inscribed into the old philosophical or metaphysical paradigm of cyclicity. Perhaps he was familiar with the work of Georges Gamow, a physicist or astrophysicist who in 1948 proposed the theory of the hot universe. Drawing on the ideas of Alexander Friedman, Georges Lemaitre, and other physicists who claimed that at the beginning of the universe there was an explosion, Gamow suggested that the primary substance was not only very dense, but also very hot. What took place in this substance was a nuclear reaction. That is, the Big Bang was a big nuclear explosion. In Ilyenkov's perspective, an explosion of such a kind must be not a natural process, but an intentional act, a violent intervention of a thinking substance into the very course of matter. This happened before, and this will happen after. This is a circle, a true infinity. Thinking substance is a connecting link between the end and the beginning of the world. Its self-sacrifice gives birth to the universe an infinite number of times. So, interesting theory. The paradigm of cyclicity, with the central place of fire as both destructive and creative primal matter, is very ancient. It comes from Heraclitus. According to Heraclitus, fire is the arche, the beginning and the first principle of the world. And one of the most Heraclitus fragments states, Kosmanton de ton auton apanton ute tis theon ute anthropon epoese au en aei kai estin kai est hai pur aeizon. Pur aeizon, my favorite. Aptomenon metra kai apos ben numenon metra. The order in cosmos the same for all, no God nor man has made, but it ever was and is and will be, fire ever living, kindled in measures and in measures going out. The cosmos is not created by anyone, according to Heraclitus. So it's a very radical thought. It is a constant, immanent movement of change fueled by the energy of the ever-living fire, and it repeats so that the cosmological future of the universe looks like the mirror of its past. Heraclitus lived in 500 years before Christ and did not know about nuclear and thermonuclear reaction. But his philosophical insights resonate with the contemporary cosmic science. Given that the development of the nuclear energy, what we call a peaceful atom, historically derives from the scientific research around nuclear bomb, another idea of Heraclitus, namely that the war is the father of all things, also comes into a new light. The war, the conflict, corresponds to his dialectics. Heraclitean universe is constantly in flux, always in becoming. Everything passes into its opposite. Nothing is permanent except this change itself. Pantarei. Everything is in flux, everything changes. Fire comes as the image of this constant movement of change. It is both destructive and creative, but more than that, it is rational. It says the rhythm of the universe, according to the rational principles of principle and law called logos. This fiery logos is the immanent intelligence of matter, which it fuses together. I'm almost done. Its ontological status is controversial. It is and it is not at the same time. Parmenides of Elea, another Greek thinker, is opposed to Heraclitus in many respects. According to Parmenides, the way of thinking that something both is and is not is totally wrong. The only truth is that what is, and what is not. Against Heraclitus, he insisted that on the permanence of being and the illusionary nature of becoming. And yet it's not in Heraclitus, but in Parmenides' poem that, as Heidegger claims in one of his interviews, the atomic bomb exploded long before humanity ever came to constructing it. What does Parmenides have to do with the atomic bomb? In Heidegger's perspective, the atomic bomb is a logical consequence of Western metaphysics, which begins from what he names the oblivion of being, the metaphysical operation of blur and the difference between beings that are present, all kinds of things, and being itself which is not present. Heidegger believes that the very fact that a thing is, so its very being precisely is not, and our blindness towards that which is not, but which nevertheless lets everything be, prevents us from grasping some deep ontological complexity of material universe. Thus is the essence of modern technology, which frames all our historical experiences as violence against the way how things are, according to Heidegger. With the paradigm of technology grounded in post-Parmenidean Western metaphysics, things are simply present and disposable. The world as essential and meaningful coexistence is always already destroyed by violent and objectifying technological worldview. There is interesting to see how, in the second half of the 20th century, both the fear of the nuclear weapons and the hopes on the nuclear energy draw from a common source of technological thinking. Nuclear energy promises a never-ending growth and cosmic expansion of humankind, while a nuclear weapon threatens to annihilate it entirely. In fact, there are these two fantasies do not compete, but rather supplement each other. What if the atomic bomb can be subjected to a similar dialectical logic of the bad and the true, just not the bad and the true infinity, but the bad and the true finitude, or the bad and the true end of humanity? The bad and the true apocalypse. The bad finitude is a nuclear war, which now stands as a kind of negative regulative idea behind our current global warfare, and seems to serve as a geopolitical deterrent. Nuclear and thermonuclear bombs appear as an element of endless expansion and colonization which aims to outlive the sun, but they also invite us to accelerate this death in a nuclear winter. It is the dead end of the bad infinity of capitalist growth inherent in its very logic. The more is produced, the more is destroyed on the way. So what about the true finitude? Does Heraclitean communism or Ilyenkov's circle present an alternative, or suicidal circle, so to say, present an alternative to the Parmenidean capitalism of the Dyson sphere? Indeed, Ilyenkov's conscious self-destruction, which brings together the two series of the peaceful nuclear energy, which will make us capable to come to the end of the universe, and the nuclear weapon, or something like alike that will help us to accomplish this end, sound counterintuitive at the very least. For most of us consumers, even the possibility of such a way of thinking is utterly incomprehensible, insane, or even immoral. But the question remains, which kind of truth can be brought about by the haunting presence of the nuclear bomb? In his essay, with which I will now slightly end, the Apocalypse is Disappointing, first published in 1964, Maurice Blanchot, another communist writer, presents a rather ironical account on the nuclear alarmism widely present in his days, just like in ours. Thus, he says, Karl Jaspers warns that, in view of the threat of humanity's total self-annihilation, we must change immediately. However, as noted by Blanchot, such calls for change do not really suggest something radically new. Behind the fear of the nuclear bomb, which was identified in Blanchot's time with Soviet communism, there is, according to him, another fear, namely the fear of social change. What is at stake is not a change, but exactly its opposite. The task of saving the world as it is, saving the situation as it is by preserving the same structures and the infrastructures and forms of social being. What is wrong with us humans, for whom such a great advance in science and technology as a nuclear bomb presents a threat? What is wrong with us humans? In Blanchot's perspective, the society which warns itself about the risks and incessantly calls for change instead of really changing is imperfect and weak. In fact, it is not even yet a humanity. It does not exist as a humanity. And what does not exist cannot be destroyed. In order to be capable of self-destruction, to master it, to be its subject and not just an object, we must first create and affirm ourselves as a whole. And I quote Blanchot, and it is not even true that the radical destruction of humanity is possible. For it to be possible, one would need the conditions of possibility to be united, real freedom, the achievement of the human community, reason as the principle of unity. In other words, a totality that must be called in the full sense communist. End of quote. Today, in the atmosphere of the worldwide rise of right-wing politics, polarizing national identities, closing the state borders, building walls and shutting down the dialogue windows, when apocalyptic passions are getting aroused by the not-so-new nuclear threat, thinking about humanity as a whole becomes totally out of fashion. But even if it's tiny and marginal, the voice of understanding, as Blanchot would say, must be heard. As he puts it, understanding is cold and without fear. It does not mistake the importance of the atomic threat, but it analyzes it, subjects it to its measures, and in examining the new problems that, because of its paradoxes, this threat poses for war strategy, it searches for the conditions in which the atomic threat might be reconciled to a viable existence in our divided world. End of quote. So the point is not to prohibit nuclear weapons, we cannot do it, but to learn to experience the freedom of not using it. In order to let the atom stay really peaceful, instead of blindly pushing the world towards the edge of the nuclear catastrophe, we would have to create ourselves as a true infinity capable to understand its final ends and collectively decide how to enjoy our explosive finitudes. That's more or less it. I hope we still have time
Yeah, thank you, Oksana, for intellectually rich presentation. So please, some question, comments, or another forms of reaction to Oksana's talk.
I can always ask a question. As you were talking about Heidegger saying this is the logical outcome of Western metaphysics, I always think about what Mbembe in Necropolitics says about the Western obsession with the end of the world, and he says there's all these other cosmologies where there's not an obsession with the end of the world because the world is always becoming, and part of that is religion, this belief in a single, universal, omniscient God. Yeah, so I guess then you have this Greek influence where Heraclitus is about becoming, which might sound in line with some of the African cosmologies that Mbembe is talking about. I wonder if you have thoughts about, I guess, both the theological component, but also how much is this very specifically a modern Western issue, and part of it is going to other maybe cosmologies. And my bigger question for you that I'm just interested in is how much is it that dialectics is wrong about ontologically collapsing the world into two things that collide?
Yeah, thank you.
That's a big
Kara,
question.
for a wonderful question. It's interesting to think about it. I will begin not from the dialectics because this is the most complicated. I don't feel myself on the position high enough now to judge at which point Heraclitus is wrong, because I'm very much still on a great impression by reading this thinker and thinking about him as well. And definitely I have to say that the distinction you propose between the more, so to say, indigenous tradition and Western or post or metaphysical or I would say monotheist tradition is an important. It can be a tiny but an important distinction, not only in the way how time is grasped and then the consequences of the end of the beginning, but also in what I could actually refer to Gretchen's previous talk. So to which my question would be, do you see a difference between, again, post or monotheist and non-monotheist and more indigenous ways of dealing with energy or the energy of things, trying to get rid of them as soon as possible because they burn the hands, and or trying to accumulate them and greediness for the things, for the material part of the universe. So these are basically, yes, there are two cosmologies. That's how I see it. And here the different and this difference, these distinctions, for me, first of all, comes through this religious moment. Not only indigenous, but I would say pre-Christian or pre-monotheist, pre-modern cosmologies have this circular moment of that somehow reappears in dialectics, in dialectical philosophy. So what is good about dialectics? That it somehow it keeps the Heraclitean moment. I actually like it. The coincidence of the beginning and of the end. You have to first, in order to begin from the very beginning, you have to reach the end. This is the taste for paradox that in our ideological environment is repressed or replaced or blurred somehow. And on the other hand, we have this bad infinity in which we cannot reach the end. So our obsession with the apocalypse and the end of the world precisely is triggered precisely by this impossibility to finally reach the end or to reach our goals. Because something in this infinite progression of numbers, of resources, of accumulation and colonization in a certain broader sense is that endless postponing of meeting the goal itself, this movement. Yeah, I know this sounds a little bit too abstract, but at this point I would still stay on the side of dialectical approach, especially in such cases as atomic nuclear energy, where I find it quite helpful.
Thank you, Oksana. My question is, in the frameworks that you've sketched, in the traditions you've sketched, is it important for thermal dyeing to do its work? Is it important that it actually happens, or is its work done can it be done in mere anticipation, like in anticipation of thermal dyeing? Or does the fire actually have to happen? And is that an important distinction? And I'm thinking about it in terms of like contemporary climate politics, where there's like a meaningful distinction between the moment of anticipation and what's expected of that politically, which is to say that it can prompt some kind of transformation, even though what it seems to be prompting is conservative responses. And is there a difference between that moment, the moment of anticipation, and the moment when the fires are actually burning? And do they need to actually burn in order to accomplish the rebirth?
It's a super important question. And now I must say that Ilyenkov, who was working in the 60s, shared the intellectual atmosphere of his time, where people were really seriously preoccupied by the idea of this thermal dyeing of the universe. What was it? The thermal dyeing of the universe will happen in billions and billions of years. It's billions of years ahead, when the sun will ultimately become first a white giant and then a red giant and then a white dwarf and then eventually die. And then there will be cold and darkness, entropy. And it was a fancy word also, how to struggle with entropy. But the question of climate change was not discussed. So they didn't yet encounter the perspective, which is not such a far away perspective, but it's a nearby perspective of a global warming. So the other way around, they were afraid of this cold, which will destroy. So first of all, they believed that humanity can live that long, which is not a fact, but everything is possible, anything is possible. And then the ecological awareness was at some different stage yet. So it's actually a contrast. It's interesting to compare today's attitude and yesterday's attitude, where the projects were still looking into infinity, and now exactly we are looking into a sort of finitude and into like a coming apocalypse. So this idea or this feeling of a coming apocalypse. It's coming and coming and coming. Is like a Campbell's or like Andy Warhol's atomic bomb, which is like a Campbell soup that is scaring and scaring and scaring. It's like a dream which is repeating and repeating, like a nightmare that repeats again and again and again, and still there is no end to this end. This is the difference. But you asked, is it really important, or what is its existential importance of having the perspective of the thermal dying of the universe in those billions of years? There was, and actually that debate came from Engels, because it was Engels who first introduced the question or the problem of the thermal death of cosmos in social science and humanities. He wrote about that in his Dialectics of Nature, and of course all Marxist thinkers were reading Engels. But not only Marxist thinkers, there was a great French philosopher, Lyotard, who also in the 60s wrote a wonderful short essay called, oh my God, how was it called? Can thought go on without a being? Something like this, or without life. And there he reflects and it's a very refined philosophical essay, which reflects upon the very idea that there can be a moment which we are not able, which the thought is not able to outlive. So it will end, and this idea is our horizon. We live it. It's absolutely necessary for us. Precisely this idea of the end of the universe, with which there are two ways of dealing. First is the way that he calls a he, and the other is a she. So it's about a gendered also difference. So the apocalyptic perspective differs gender-wise. I will not tell you the yes, but I just
we still have two more questions. Please ask them in a brief form. No, Alexander.
Okay, Oxana, I'm kind of fascinated that certain elements or tropes are coming around again in all our three talks that seem to be so different. So I had wanted to end with the question of apocalyptic reason and apocalyptic thinking and then cut it, but then I mentioned it afterwards. And I was wondering also with the question of Darren and Kara's question, if there hasn't been an alternative within latest Western philosophy and thinking to these kind of extremist notions, and that's the idea of becoming and unbecoming, of course, the Deleuze-Guattari version, where, as I understood it, and which was of course extremely important for me, you don't necessarily need to imagine, radical ends or anything to be able to think constant flux, but you imagine kind of interrelatedness of everything that constantly changes forms at the margins. At some times, of course, then they turn into another state of being, so to say. So it's also a very ecological mode of philosophical thought, I think. And regarding the fires of climate warming, I would say, of course they are already burning, and regarding the catastrophe, it has, of course, already happened all the time. So I would still say that it doesn't make sense to invoke the apocalypse, especially since it has been so completely appropriated, at least at the time being, by a more or less stupid and substanceless way of using it, like, this will be the end of America, this will be the end of Germany.
Oh, that I remember, yes, right, great question. I remember there was already the end of America. Don't you remember Trump was already a president and everybody was saying the apocalypse is coming, now you will see the end. Then we had it multiple times, but it's interesting to see the difference between the Russian and American, the Trumpist and the Putinist apocalypse, because American vision is always like apocalyptic. I mean, this kind of Hollywood and ideological and existential, how people perceive things. It's rather the idea of a coming apocalypse, whereas for Russians the apocalypse is always already happened. Is something that always already happened. For instance, like votes, say elections. People do not just don't go there, but then next day they say, we knew that. We already know that very much in advance that Putin will win, and so on and so forth. So post-apocalyptic, but of course this is more like a joke. But I would suggest to supplement the apocalyptic perspective with post-apocalyptic, because, as you rightly say, something that can be defined as apocalypse already happened. I remember once there was a flood. There was a terrible flood in the Balkans, where a lot of people suffered and animals died, and then I was at the time it was like something like 2013, and I was stricken by seeing. I was in America, in New York, and there was a conference on in some leftist conference. And the panel on ecological climate change and so on. Maybe it was not even called climate change back at that time, because terms also change. So they were discussing ecological problems. And when someone mentioned this flooding in the Balkans, somebody from the speakers said that, oh, this is just something, small local things. Yes, it might be important, but it's just a local, it's not an apocalypse. Then I thought about, the flood. I love this topic very much. So the flood was a global thing, right? The whole, from the Bible, the story referred by the authors of the Bible, there we have the flood that destroys the world completely. And then one mountain emerges from water, which is Ararat in Armenia. And Noah's Ark saves saves all species. Clean by sevens and unclean by couples. And this is a global event. But if we think about it in simple terms, if we imagine ourselves in the situation of flood, like if we were on the Balkans, this would be like the flood. So every flood is the flood at the same time. Every local catastrophe, every local ecological catastrophe, a fire or a flood, is at the same time the global, the end of the universe for those who are in, for the insiders, not for the observers. And the idea of humanity as a whole, as a totality mentioned by Blanchot, in this sense, sounds for me absolutely healing, because every piece of this whole that is touched by the consequences of the our capitalist development, so to say, affects the entire whole, but the whole doesn't notice it. So, but that part is already extinct, and we didn't notice that. So they were already extinct before even being physically vanished. Think of, like, I don't know, certain species that still exist, and even from some, I don't know, pragmatical point of view, they proliferate, like salmon, industrial salmon. Industrial salmon lives in such a way that the very form of its body, from the moment of its birth to their end, to their death, is totally subordinated to the means of the production of profit. This is what Marx calls real subsumption. This creature, then, what it lacks is its own essence. So essential, how to say, essence in the philosophical sense is like the way how it is designed to be, and by lacking its essence, in a way, it is already extinct, even if it still like proliferates. There are many salmon, right? They are produced and reproduced, and this is the idea of real subsumption. So real subsumption is that which produces this effect of the disappearance of what seems to exist, but this is already, I'm going somewhere to the metaphysical direction, we can discuss it, and I see that my moderator is approaching.
Yeah, we still have, okay, probably the last question to you. Yeah, please.
The last.
Yeah, because
thank you very much for this
exhausted.
fascinating talk. It's just a small art historical or art critical comment. I'm disagreeing with your reading of Warhol's Bad Infinity. I think you have to take it at face value. It's about a machine repetition. And the point is to do away with the most prestigious humanistic endeavor, art. Art is reduced to machine production. And so I don't think it's dramatic, it's traumatic, it's on trauma, but it's a comedy, it's a black comedy. And the point, it fits in differently to your discourse. The point is that the end of humanity is already over. There are no humans left in the industrial production age. So this is it's not fitting to a cosmological or apocalyptic thinking, but a comedy style idea of the end of humanity in a capitalist age.
Yeah, Oksana, please be very short and don't start from the Bible, yeah? Okay. If you can, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but interpreting, I didn't develop any kind of interpretation of Warhol's painting. I just wanted to contrast it with these hyper-optimistic projections onto the future, because as you rightly said, he really shows this repetition of the image, and repetition is the driving force of comedy, right? But it's also, there is something in the psychoanalytic sense, in the Freudian sense, or Lacanian sense, repetition is also about a death drive, which is not the desire to die, but the desire to somehow to return at the previous stage, to kind of undo something that has happened. So there is actually a good intention behind the comic repetition of the same failure or certain traumatic moment. Yes, but in general, I have to say that comedy is very underestimated, especially in our apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic times, because it provides a much more powerful means of grasping the sense of what is really going on. Yes, and And also, it's a dialectical thing. So the comedy and dialectics are friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Oksana.